Welcome to the True Crimes Unfold compilation video series. Please note that events and scenarios in this video may be graphic for some viewers. Discretion is advised. Details of the videos are taken from actual case files. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what type of cases you'd like us to cover next, and we'll make sure to add them to our list. Don't forget to subscribe to get new stories as soon as they're released. Abound. Now settle in, get ready, and let's begin. In the heart of southern Taiwan's bustling city of Kaohsiung, where neon lights flicker over crowded night markets, a blood-curdling scream pierced the midnight air, unraveling a chilling tale of obsession, manipulation, and a love triangle gone deadly. It was a night like any other in Kaohsiung, a city that never truly sleeps. But for one college student, the silence of her late-night studies was shattered at 4:40 a.m. by horrifying screams echoing from the apartment complex across the street. A man's voice, raw with terror, begged for mercy. Heart pounding, she froze. Was someone being attacked? Was she in danger? Grabbing her phone with trembling hands, she dialed the police, her eyes locked on the dimly lit window above a quiet music store. "Please, hurry! Someone is screaming for help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the panic rising in her throat. Police arrived promptly, their sirens cutting through the night. They approached the music store, the only entrance to the apartments above, but found it locked and eerily silent. They rang the bell, knocked loudly, and even tried calling the shop's number. Nothing. Assuming it was a prank, or perhaps a drunken dispute now resolved, they left without further investigation. Little did they know, behind those locked doors, a sinister scene awaited. A scene they could have interrupted, possibly saving a life. As the sun climbed high, around noon, a frantic call came into the police station. A man named Mr. Tsai, a staff member at the music shop, reported a break-in. He claimed the owner's wife had called him, saying she was tied up during a robbery. When officers rushed back to the scene, they found Lin Yenyi, known simply as Lin, sitting alone on the first floor. Petite and disheveled, with eyes red from tears, she painted a picture of distress. "They took everything," she stammered. "They hurt him. My husband." But as detectives ascended to the fifth-floor residence above the shop, the true horror unveiled itself. The apartment was awash with water, pooling around their feet as they cautiously moved toward the bathroom. There, slumped in the bathtub, was Su Chie-heng, or Heng, Lin's husband, naked, bound with masking tape, and lifeless. His face was unrecognizable, swollen, bruised, a grotesque mask of purple and red. His mouth was stuffed with black underwear wrapped tightly with layers of tape. The brutality was unmistakable. Someone had unleashed a frenzy of violence upon him. Detectives noted the oddities immediately. Despite the vicious attack, the rest of the apartment was strangely tidy, almost as if someone had attempted to clean up. The walls and bathtub bore cracks, evidence of a violent struggle. Yet there were signs of a hurried attempt to erase what had transpired. Why would an intruder bother to tidy up? And how did they gain access without any signs of forced entry? As the questions mounted, so did the suspicion. Lin, the sole witness, recounted a harrowing story. She and Heng had returned home around 1 a.m. after a night out, enjoying drinks and music before retiring to bed. Both took sleeping pills, she claimed, to ensure a restful night. Around 4 a.m., Lynn said she was jolted awake by sounds of a struggle. She found a large, red-haired man attacking her husband in the bathroom. Panicked, she pleaded with the assailant, offering money, anything to make him stop. "I told him I was pregnant," she sobbed. "I begged him to spare Heng for our baby's sake." According to Lynn, the intruder forced her to fetch masking tape and cleaning supplies. Obediently, she descended 5 flights of stairs, twice, to retrieve them, supposedly under duress. The attacker then tied her hands with a silk scarf, and inexplicably, she fell asleep on the bed, not waking until hours later. Her story was riddled with inconsistencies. Why didn't she escape when she had the chance? Why wait 7 hours to call for help? And who falls asleep after witnessing such horror? Seasoned detectives sensed something was amiss. The lack of forced entry suggested the assailant was either let in or already inside. No valuables were taken. Heng's wallet and the cash register remained untouched. Moreover, Lynn's description of the attacker, a tall, muscular man with red hair, seemed oddly theatrical. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras added to the mystery. At around 4 a.m., a figure was seen approaching the building. Clad in women's clothing, the person appeared to change attire before entering the shop, easily gaining access. Later, around noon, a man was captured leaving the premises, wearing a cap and mask, carrying a bag, hardly the conspicuous red-haired giant Lynn described. Digging deeper, investigators uncovered layers of complexity. Heng, a charismatic drum teacher, and Lynn, a piano and cello instructor, had a tumultuous marriage. Neighbors reported frequent fights, and whispers of infidelity swirled around them. Heng had been sending money to a woman named Rong, a nurse he was allegedly involved with, a fact even his mother acknowledged. Meanwhile, Lynn's behavior grew increasingly suspicious. Her phone records revealed a flurry of messages to a man named Wei, an English tutor from a remote area called Jiaotu. On the day of the murder, she had been in constant contact with him, even as detectives were at her home. When police tracked down Wei, they found a nervous, trembling man who quickly confessed to being at the scene. His initial story was fantastical. He claimed to be in a secret relationship with Heng, involving sex parties and substantial loans. But the evidence didn't support his tale. Under pressure, Wei changed his story. He admitted to being Lynn's lover, ensnared by her tales of abuse and desperation. She painted Heng as a monster, and Wei, hopelessly infatuated, became her pawn. As investigators pieced together the puzzle, a chilling picture emerged. Lynn had manipulated Wei, exploiting his naivety and affection. She fed him lies about her husband's alleged abuse, driving Wei to eliminate Heng. Evidence mounted against her. A search of her internet history uncovered damning queries. How to drown someone in a bathtub, sleeping pill overdose, inheritance laws, and more. She had meticulously planned every detail, intending to make Heng's death look like an accident. But when things didn't go as smoothly, the plan unraveled, leaving a trail leading straight back to her. This was no random act of violence. It was a calculated murder, orchestrated by a woman willing to manipulate and sacrifice anyone to achieve her ends. Lin's deceit knew no bounds, and Wei became both her weapon and her scapegoat. As investigators delved deeper into the gruesome murder of Su Chie-hing, Lin Yanyi's fragile story began to crumble. Her inconsistent testimony and puzzling behavior led detectives to scrutinize every aspect of her account. Uncovering a web of deceit so intricate, it ensnared not just her lover Wei, but the entire investigation itself. From the moment Lin claimed her husband had been killed by a towering red-haired assailant, her story raised eyebrows. The inconsistencies in her timeline, her failure to call for help sooner, and her ability to calmly fall asleep after such a brutal scene made no sense. Detectives pressed her further, but Lin's responses grew more erratic. Her teary demeanor gave way to defensiveness, and at times, almost arrogance. "I did what I had to do to survive," she insisted, but if survival had been her priority, why didn't she escape when she had the chance? Surveillance footage continued to undermine her claims. The images of a figure entering the building in women's clothing, later leaving disguised as a man, bore no resemblance to the violent stranger she described. It became clear whoever had entered that night wasn't an unknown assailant. This was someone Lin knew and likely invited. The breakthrough came when police tracked down Wei, the nervous and timid English tutor from Kyoto. Wei was visibly shaken during his initial questioning, struggling to maintain eye contact and fumbling over his words. It didn't take long before he cracked under pressure, admitting his involvement. Wei's confession was a revelation. He admitted to being in a romantic relationship with Lin, who had convinced him that her husband Heng was abusive and controlling. Lin claimed she feared for her life and begged Wei to help her escape the marriage. "She told me she had no one else to turn to," Wei said, his voice trembling. "I thought I was saving her." Wei painted a picture of a woman who was as charming as she was cunning. Lin had spun a narrative of desperation, portraying herself as a victim trapped in a loveless and abusive marriage. Wei, smitten and gullible, believed every word. Lin claimed Heng regularly beat her, locked her in the apartment, and controlled her finances. She showed Wei bruises, which investigators later determined were self-inflicted or fabricated with makeup. Over the course of their affair, Lin convinced Wei to lend her money, claiming it was to pay off debts her husband had forced upon her. In reality, Lin used the funds to cover her personal expenses and maintain her double life. Lin's ultimate manipulation came when she began discussing plans to end her suffering. She suggested that the only way out was for Heng to be removed permanently, framing it as an act of liberation rather than murder. Wei, desperate to prove his love, agreed to help. Through Wei's confession and additional evidence, investigators pieced together the chilling events of that fateful night. Lin lured Heng home after a night out, ensuring he would take his usual sleeping pills, a crucial part of her plan. She messaged Wei, instructing him to arrive at 4 a.m., when Heng would be deeply asleep. Wei arrived in disguise, as instructed by Lin, to avoid being recognized on security cameras. Lin greeted him at the door, and together they entered the apartment. But when Wei tried to subdue Heng, the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Heng awoke and fought back fiercely. shattering the illusion of Lin's carefully crafted plan. In the chaos, Wei resorted to suffocating Hing, using Lin's underwear and masking tape, while Lin stood by, directing his actions. Panicking after the murder, Lin attempted to clean the scene, instructing Wei to mop up blood and discard evidence. However, their efforts were rushed and clumsy, leaving behind telltale signs of their involvement. Detectives uncovered a mountain of evidence that tied Lin and Wei to the crime, dismantling Lin's claims of innocence. Lin's phone revealed chilling internet searches in the weeks leading up to the murder, including how to stage a robbery, how to overdose someone, and inheritance laws for surviving spouses. Investigators recovered encrypted messages between Lin and Wei, in which Lin laid out her plans and reassured Wei that everything would work out. In one particularly damning message, Lin wrote, "After this, we'll finally be free." Fingerprints matching Wei's were found on the masking tape and cleaning supplies, while DNA evidence placed both Wei and Lin at the scene during the time of the murder. As the weight of his actions sank in, Wei became consumed by guilt. He admitted that he had been manipulated by Lin, but did not absolve himself of responsibility. "I should have seen through her lies," Wei told investigators, "but I loved her. I believed her." Wei's heartfelt confession painted him as a tragic figure, an unwitting accomplice who had been used as a pawn in Lin's deadly scheme. His remorse stood in stark contrast to Lin's cold and calculating demeanor. Meanwhile, Lin's behavior grew increasingly erratic as the evidence against her mounted. She alternated between defiance and denial, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming proof of her involvement. Lin attempted to shift all blame onto Wei, claiming he acted alone out of jealousy and obsession. However, her attempts to distance herself only made her appear more culpable. Throughout the investigation, Lin displayed little to no remorse for her actions. Detectives noted her focus was always on her own predicament, rather than the life she had taken or the devastation she had caused. Psychologists who evaluated Lin described her as manipulative and narcissistic, with a chilling ability to exploit others for her own gain. Her lack of empathy and tendency to view others as tools in her schemes made her a particularly dangerous figure. As the truth came to light, the full extent of Lin's betrayal became clear, not just to investigators, but to those who had once trusted her. Heng's family, who had welcomed Lin into their lives, struggled to reconcile the woman they knew with the cold-blooded killer revealed in court. Meanwhile, Wei's family grappled with the shame and heartbreak of his involvement. A kind-hearted but gullible man, Wei had been led astray by a woman who saw his love and trust as weapons to be used. When Lin Yanyi and Wei stood trial for the brutal murder of Su Che-heng, the courtroom transformed into a theater of high-stakes drama. The public watched with bated breath as sordid details of Lin's manipulation and Wei's tragic gullibility unraveled. The trial exposed not only the dark hearts of those involved, but also the societal flaws that enabled such a horrifying crime to occur. The prosecution wasted no time painting Lin as the cold-hearted mastermind behind the crime. Their narrative centered on her calculated exploitation of Wei's love and her ruthless ambition to rid herself of her husband, whose life stood in the way of her financial and personal freedom. Prosecutors highlighted Lynn's chilling internet search history, including terms like how to stage a robbery, lethal doses of drugs, and will inheritance laws in Taiwan. They introduced the encrypted messages between Lynn and Wei, showcasing her detailed instructions and reassurances to Wei that they would succeed. One message, in particular, sent chills through the courtroom. "No one will miss him. Trust me." Bank records revealed that Lynn stood to inherit a substantial sum from Sue's life insurance policy, along with his savings and property. Prosecutors argued this was her primary motive for orchestrating the murder. Lynn's fingerprints on the cleaning supplies and her DNA on the tape used to bind Sue's body were undeniable proof of her active participation in the crime. Coupled with Wei's confession, the evidence painted a damning picture of Lynn's guilt. While Lynn's guilt seemed clear-cut, the defense painted Wei as a tragic figure, an unassuming man who fell victim to Lynn's manipulation. His lawyer argued that Wei's role in the murder stemmed not from malice, but from a misguided attempt to protect the woman he loved. Wei's defense team presented psychological evaluations that described him as naive and easily influenced. Experts testified that Wei suffered from low self-esteem and an overwhelming desire to please others, making him an ideal target for Lynn's manipulation. Wei's tearful testimony moved the courtroom. He admitted to his involvement but emphasized his regret and his belief at the time that he was saving Lynn from an abusive relationship. "I believed her," Wei said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was helping her escape a nightmare. I didn't realize I was part of one." The defense shifted much of the blame onto Lynn, portraying her as a cunning manipulator who had orchestrated every detail of the crime while using Wei as her pawn. Lynn's defense team took a different approach, attempting to deflect blame entirely onto Wei. Their strategy relied on portraying Lynn as a victim, both of Wei's obsession and her husband's supposed abuse. Lynn claimed she had no knowledge of Wei's plans to kill Sue, insisting that she had been coerced into silence by Wei after the murder. Her lawyers argued that Wei acted out of jealousy and unrequited love, framing Lynn as an unwilling participant. In a bid to garner sympathy, Lynn doubled down on her allegations of abuse against Sue, describing him as controlling and violent. However, these claims were contradicted by Sue's friends and family, who described him as a gentle and hard-working man. Lynn's lawyers attempted to discredit the forensic evidence, arguing that her fingerprints and DNA at the crime scene were circumstantial, as she lived in the apartment and had handled many of the items found there. The most poignant moments of the trial came from the victim's family. Sue's parents, visibly shaken, took the stand to describe their son's life and the devastation his death had caused. Sue's mother spoke through tears about her son's dedication to his family and his tireless efforts to provide for Lynn. "He worked so hard for her," she said, "and this is how she repaid him." Sue's father expressed his disbelief that Lynn, the woman they had welcomed into their family, could be capable of such cruelty. "She destroyed our family," he said. "She took everything from us." The family's testimonies underscored the gravity of the crime and the need for accountability. Their words resonated with the jury, adding an emotional weight to the prosecution's case. To provide further context for the jury, the prosecution called on psychologists who analyzed Lynn's behavior. Their testimony revealed chilling insights into her psyche. Experts described Lynn as exhibiting traits of narcissistic personality disorder, including a lack of empathy, a sense of entitlement, and a willingness to manipulate others for personal gain. Lynn's ability to exploit Wei's emotions and orchestrate the murder was indicative of a highly manipulative individual. She saw people as tools. One psychologist explained, Wei wasn't her lover. He was her instrument. Despite overwhelming evidence, Lynn maintained a detached demeanor throughout the trial, further highlighting her inability to comprehend the impact of her actions. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Lin Yanyi was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and fraud, earning her a life sentence without parole. Wei, while also found guilty of murder, was granted a reduced sentence of 20 years due to his cooperation with authorities and genuine remorse. The courtroom erupted in mixed emotions as the verdict was read. For Sue's family, it was a bittersweet moment, a sense of justice tempered by the knowledge that nothing could bring their son back. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a case that had captivated Taiwan and sparked widespread reflection on the nature of trust, manipulation, and vulnerability. Public sentiment was overwhelmingly against Lin, with many viewing her as a calculating villain who showed no remorse for her actions. While Wei's actions were condemned, his story resonated with those who had experienced manipulation or unrequited love. Many saw him as a cautionary tale of how blind devotion can lead to devastating consequences. The case prompted discussions about emotional abuse, toxic relationships, and the importance of recognizing red flags in interpersonal dynamics. The trial of Lin Yanyi and Wei was more than a courtroom drama. It was a societal reckoning. It highlighted the dangers of manipulation, the importance of accountability, and the need for empathy and vigilance in the face of complex human relationships. The conviction of Lin Yanyi and Wei marked the end of one of Taiwan's most shocking criminal cases. But the ripples of their actions extended far beyond the courtroom. For Su Chie-heng's grieving family, for Wei's shattered life, and for a nation grappling with the dark truths of manipulation and betrayal, the aftermath was a mix of painful reflection and a search for meaningful change. For Sue's parents, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but could never erase the loss of their beloved son. Their grief was palpable, their voices shaking as they spoke about the lingering pain of losing the cornerstone of their family. "He was our pride and joy," Sue's father said during a memorial service. "We dreamed of watching him build a family of his own. Instead, we had to bury him." Despite Lin's conviction, the family struggled to comprehend how someone they had welcomed with open arms could betray them so cruelly. "We treated her like a daughter," Sue's mother lamented. "How could she repay us with such evil?" In the wake of the trial, the family established a foundation in Sue's name to raise awareness about toxic relationships and manipulation. The initiative provided counseling and support for victims of emotional abuse, ensuring that Sue's legacy would be one of healing and hope. Wei's role in the murder left him with a heavy burden of guilt, but his remorse and cooperation with authorities earned him public sympathy. His story became a cautionary tale of how blind trust and emotional manipulation can lead to devastating consequences. Way's reduced sentence gave him a chance at eventual freedom, but prison life was a stark reminder of the cost of his actions. Every day, I think about what I've done, he reportedly said in a letter to his family. I will never forgive myself. Way's family, initially devastated by his involvement, began the slow process of reconciliation. His parents became vocal advocates for educating young people about the dangers of manipulation, using their son's story as an example. While some viewed Way as a victim of Lynn's cunning, others criticized him for failing to recognize the consequences of his actions. Love can blind us, one commentator wrote, but it can't excuse taking a life. The cyanide am case had already cast a shadow over Taiwan's sense of safety and trust. But the case of Lin and Wei added another layer of complexity. The nation began to reflect deeply on the societal factors that allowed such a tragedy to unfold. Public discourse shifted toward understanding the warning signs of toxic relationships. Counselors and psychologists were invited to TV programs and forums to educate the public on how to recognize manipulation, coercion, and emotional abuse. Advocacy groups used the case to highlight the importance of support systems for those in toxic relationships. Hotlines and shelters reported an increase in calls as individuals sought help to escape abusive dynamics. Lynn's actions prompted conversations about societal expectations placed on women and the pressures to achieve material success. Her manipulative behavior was viewed by some as a symptom of deeper cultural issues, including the stigmatization of failure and the glorification of wealth. The trial and its aftermath became a media sensation, with news outlets and social media platforms analyzing every detail of the case. While the coverage ensured the public remained engaged, it also sparked debates about the ethics of sensationalizing such a tragic story. Several filmmakers and journalists produced in-depth documentaries and podcasts about the case, exploring its societal implications and providing a platform for Sue's family to share their story. Hashtags like #Justice for Sue and in Lessons from Wei trended across platforms, sparking conversations about trust, accountability, and emotional resilience. Users shared personal stories of overcoming manipulation, creating a sense of collective healing. Some criticized the media for focusing too heavily on the drama of the trial rather than the broader issues it raised. This isn't entertainment, one columnist wrote. It's a tragedy that should make us reflect, not gossip. The case highlighted significant gaps in Taiwan's legal and social systems, prompting calls for reform to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Stricter sentencing for manipulative crimes. Lawmakers proposed harsher penalties for crimes involving coercion and manipulation, emphasizing the need to hold masterminds accountable for their actions. Schools began incorporating lessons on emotional intelligence and healthy relationships into their curricula, aiming to equip young people with the tools to recognize and resist manipulation. Funding for mental health services and support groups was increased, ensuring that individuals like Wei had access to resources before becoming entangled in destructive relationships. Despite the darkness surrounding his death, Sue's life became a source of inspiration for many. Friends and family remembered him as a kind-hearted, hard-working man who always put others before himself. Through memorials and charitable initiatives, his legacy became a beacon of hope. A scholarship program was established to support underprivileged students pursuing careers in mechanics and engineering, reflecting Sue's passion for his work. On the anniversary of his death, organizations held events to raise awareness about the dangers of manipulation and emotional abuse, ensuring that his story continued to inspire change. Sue's story brought communities together, fostering a collective commitment to vigilance and empathy. "We can't change the past," a family friend said, "but we can honor Sue by protecting others from suffering the same fate." The case of Lin and Wei serves as a haunting reminder of the power of manipulation and the devastating consequences of misplaced trust. But it is also a story of resilience, reflection, and the enduring strength of those who refuse to let tragedy define them. This isn't just about one crime, a psychologist involved in the case said. It's about understanding how we can better protect ourselves and each other in a world where trust can be exploited. The shocking case of Lin Yanyi and Wei became more than just a story of betrayal and murder. It became a catalyst for change. The aftermath of their actions sparked intense conversations about manipulation, emotional abuse, and the societal norms that enable such tragedies. From legal reforms to cultural shifts, Taiwan grappled with the lessons of the case and sought ways to protect future victims. The trial exposed significant shortcomings in Taiwan's legal system, particularly regarding emotional manipulation and coercion. In response, lawmakers and advocacy groups pushed for reforms that would prevent similar crimes and ensure justice for future victims. For the first time, Taiwan's legal system began exploring how emotional manipulation could be treated as a form of abuse. Legislators proposed amendments to existing laws to include coercion, gaslighting, and other non-physical forms of harm as punishable offenses. New guidelines were introduced to impose harsher sentences for crimes involving manipulation or premeditation. These changes aim to hold perpetrators accountable for psychological as well as physical harm. The government increased funding for support services, including shelters, counseling, and legal aid for those in abusive or manipulative relationships. A new hotline was launched to provide immediate assistance to individuals experiencing emotional abuse or coercion. Beyond the courtroom, the case ignited a cultural reckoning. Taiwan's society began re-evaluating its understanding of trust, love, and the dangers of unchecked manipulation. Advocacy groups launched nationwide campaigns to educate the public about the warning signs of toxic relationships. Workshops, billboards, and social media ads emphasized red flags such as isolation, financial control, and emotional blackmail. The case highlighted the importance of mental health resources, not just for victims, but also for potential perpetrators like Wei, whose vulnerability made him an easy target. Schools and workplaces introduced mental health programs to promote emotional resilience and self-awareness. Lin's actions sparked debates about societal pressures on women to achieve material success and maintain appearances. Feminist organizations used the case to advocate for broader conversations about gender equality and dismantling harmful stereotypes. The media played a pivotal role in bringing the case to public attention, but its coverage was not without controversy. While the detailed reporting kept the public informed, it also raised ethical questions about the balance between awareness and sensationalism. Documentaries, podcasts, and news features delved deep into the case, providing context and exploring the psychological dynamics at play. These narratives educated audiences and ensured the lessons of the case reached a global audience. Hashtags like East Manipulation Kills and Justice for Sue trended for weeks, turning public outrage into a digital movement. Victims of emotional abuse shared their stories, creating a sense of solidarity and empowerment. Some commentators argued that the media's focus on the more lurid details of the case overshadowed its broader societal implications. "This isn't a soap opera," one editorial stated. "It's a tragedy that demands reflection, not voyeurism." One of the most significant outcomes of the case was the expansion of support systems for victims of manipulation and emotional abuse. Advocacy groups and government agencies collaborated to ensure that help was available for those in need. Free counseling programs were established to help individuals recognize and recover from toxic relationships. These services provided victims with tools to rebuild their self-esteem and regain control over their lives. Peer-led support groups offered safe spaces for survivors to share their experiences and find strength in one another. These groups became lifelines for individuals who had felt isolated and powerless. New helplines were launched to provide immediate assistance and guidance to individuals experiencing emotional abuse. These services were staffed by trained counselors who could offer practical advice and emotional support. The case of Lin and Wei resonated deeply with the public, uniting communities in a shared commitment to preventing similar tragedies. Grassroots movements and local organizations worked tirelessly to raise awareness and build a culture of vigilance. Community centers hosted events to educate residents about manipulation, emotional abuse, and healthy relationship dynamics. These workshops equipped attendees with the knowledge to protect themselves and their loved ones. Schools introduced programs on emotional intelligence and relationship skills, teaching students how to recognize unhealthy behaviors and assert their boundaries. These initiatives aim to foster a generation better equipped to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics. Local governments, NGOs, and private organizations joined forces to create comprehensive strategies for addressing emotional abuse. These partnerships ensured that resources and support were accessible to all, regardless of socioeconomic status. While the case of Lin and Wei is one of betrayal and tragedy, Sue's life and memory have become a source of inspiration. His story has been transformed into a beacon of hope and a call to action for a safer and more empathetic society. A scholarship fund was established to support students pursuing careers in Sue's field of mechanics, honoring his dedication to hard work and perseverance. On the anniversary of Sue's death, advocacy groups and community leaders held events to remember his life and promote awareness of manipulation and emotional abuse. For many, Sue's story represents the importance of standing against injustice and protecting those who cannot see the dangers they face. His legacy continues to inspire individuals to take action and create a more compassionate world. The case of Lin and Wei is more than a cautionary tale. It is a story of resilience, reform, and hope. While the tragedy cannot be undone, its impact has sparked meaningful change, ensuring that Sue's death was not in vain. We can't rewrite the past, a victim advocate said at a recent memorial. But we can honor Sue's life by creating a future where trust is sacred, manipulation is exposed, and justice prevails. A young yoga instructor with a bright future disappears hours before her flight. What unfolded next revealed a chilling tale of love, control, and tragedy. She was vibrant, full of life, and ready to chase her dreams abroad. But just hours before her flight to the United States, Aqua Chow vanished. What followed was a chilling unraveling of secrets, betrayal, and a crime that shook Hong Kong to its core. It was the evening of June 30th, 2022, and 23-year-old Aqua Chow was preparing for the next chapter of her life. A yoga instructor and rising social media influencer, Aqua had long dreamed of moving to the United States to expand her horizons. Her bags were packed, her passport was ready, and her future seemed bright. But that night, something went terribly wrong. At around 10 p.m., Aqua's friends became concerned when she failed to respond to their messages. They had planned to see her off at the airport the next morning, but now there was radio silence. Calls went unanswered, texts were read but unacknowledged. For someone as communicative as Aqua, this was unusual. By midnight, their worry turned into alarm. A close friend, feeling uneasy, decided to visit Aqua's apartment. What they found sent chills down their spine. Aqua's neatly packed luggage sat untouched by the door, but Aqua herself was nowhere to be found. Investigators pieced together Aqua's last known movements through CCTV footage and witness accounts. The footage revealed that Aqua had left her apartment earlier that evening, seemingly in a hurry. She was last seen entering a car driven by a man identified as 28-year-old Alex Lowe, her ex-boyfriend. Friends later recounted that Aqua had confided in them about her turbulent relationship with Alex. Their breakup had been messy, with Aqua expressing fears about his controlling behavior. Despite their split, Alex had insisted on meeting Aqua one last time before her flight, a meeting that would tragically be her last. Aqua and Alex's relationship, which began 2 years earlier, seemed picture-perfect on the surface. Alex, a martial artist and entrepreneur, often posted photos of the couple on lavish dates, painting a picture of an idyllic romance. But behind the Instagram filters was a darker truth. Friends described Alex as possessive and controlling. He would frequently check Aqua's phone, question her friendships, and isolate her from her social circles. He had a way of making her feel small, one friend recalled. She started doubting herself, her choices. It was like he wanted her to depend on him entirely. Aqua, on the other hand, had started to find her voice. Her yoga practice and growing social media presence gave her a newfound confidence, and she began to push back against Alex's control. Their arguments became more frequent, and Aqua finally decided to end the relationship. But Alex wasn't ready to let go. According to phone records, Alex had messaged Aqua repeatedly in the days leading up to her departure, pleading to meet her one last time. Friends advised her to decline, warning her about his volatile temper. But Aqua, always empathetic, agreed. "I think she wanted closure," another friend said. She thought it was just a conversation. The CCTV footage showed Alex picking Aqua up in his car. They drove to a high-rise apartment complex in Simshatsui, where Alex had recently rented a unit. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices later that night, but dismissed it as a domestic dispute. When Aqua didn't show up for her flight the next morning, her family filed a missing person report. Police traced her last known location to Alex's apartment, where they made a gruesome discovery. Aqua's body was found in the bathroom, her wrists and ankles bound with multiple stab wounds to her chest. The scene was both horrifying and calculated. Forensic investigators noted that the wounds were inflicted with precision, suggesting premeditation. Blood spatter patterns indicated a struggle, but Aqua's bindings rendered her defenseless. This wasn't a crime of passion, one detective later remarked. This was planned. Alex was arrested later that day at a friend's house where he had been hiding. Police found incriminating evidence in his possession, including Aqua's phone and the knife believed to be the murder weapon. During questioning, Alex's demeanor was unsettlingly calm. He admitted to meeting Aqua, but denied any involvement in her death. She was alive when I left, he insisted, but the evidence told a different story. CCTV footage placed Alex at the crime scene well past midnight, and his search history revealed chilling queries like how to tie someone up and quick ways to silence a person. News of Aqua's murder spread quickly, leaving Hong Kong in collective grief and outrage. Social media was flooded with tributes from her students, followers, and friends. Her radiant smile, captured in countless yoga poses and candid moments, became a haunting reminder of a life cut short. But the public's grief was matched by anger at the systemic failures that allowed Aqua to fall victim to such violence. Advocacy groups used her story to spotlight issues of domestic abuse and the dangers of coercive control, sparking a nationwide conversation about the red flags in toxic relationships. As the investigation deepened, more questions emerged. Why did Aqua agree to meet Alex despite her fears? Was she coerced or threatened? And most chillingly, was this a calculated act of revenge by a man who couldn't accept losing control? As the gruesome details of Aqua Chow's murder came to light, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading to her tragic end. Every clue, from Alex Lowe's search history to the crime scene itself, painted a chilling picture of premeditation, betrayal, and a desperate attempt to cling to control. The high-rise apartment in Simshatsui, where Aqua's body was discovered, became the focal point of the investigation. Forensic experts meticulously combed through the unit, uncovering critical pieces of evidence that pointed directly to Alex. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife found in the bathroom, bore Alex's fingerprints and Aqua's blood. The blade's angle and the depth of the wounds indicated that Aqua had been stabbed repeatedly in a fit of rage. Aqua's wrists and ankles were bound with zip ties, immobilizing her during the attack. Investigators found a pack of zip ties in Alex's kitchen drawer, with receipts confirming their recent purchase. Blood spatter patterns in the living room suggested that Aqua had fought back, but her bindings rendered her powerless. Broken furniture and torn cushions indicated a violent confrontation. Alex had attempted to delete security footage from the building's cameras. However, forensic technicians recovered fragments showing Aqua entering the apartment but never leaving, a haunting testament to her final moments. Alex's digital footprint revealed his intentions long before the crime occurred. Investigators uncovered a series of online searches and messages that painted a disturbing picture of premeditation. In the weeks leading up to Aqua's murder, Alex searched terms like how to tie someone up, quick ways to knock someone unconscious, and how long does it take to bleed out? These chilling queries left little doubt about his state of mind. Text exchanges between Alex and Aqua showed his escalating attempts to control her. In one message he wrote, "If I can't have you, no one will." Another read, "Don't think you can just walk away from me." Alex had installed a tracking app on Aqua's phone, allowing him to monitor her location. This discovery confirmed his obsessive need to control every aspect of her life. Using CCTV footage, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies, investigators reconstructed the timeline of Aqua's final hours. The chilling sequence revealed the extent of Alex's premeditation and Aqua's tragic vulnerability. CCTV cameras captured Alex picking Aqua up in his car around 8:00 p.m. Witnesses later described Aqua as appearing tense and uneasy during the ride. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices and loud thuds from Alex's apartment around 10 p.m. Forensic analysis indicated that the initial altercation likely began in the living room. By midnight, the situation had escalated to violence. Blood patterns suggested Aqua was dragged to the bathroom, where Alex delivered the fatal wounds. The bindings found on her wrists and ankles confirmed that she was restrained during the attack. After the murder, Alex attempted to clean the scene and dispose of incriminating evidence. However, his efforts were haphazard, leaving behind a wealth of forensic clues. Criminal psychologists brought in to analyze Alex's behavior described him as a classic case of coercive control, a dangerous mix of obsession, entitlement, and a refusal to accept rejection. Alex's relationship with Aqua was marked by his need to dominate every aspect of her life. From monitoring her movements to questioning her friendships, he systematically eroded her independence. Aqua's decision to leave Alex was a direct threat to his sense of power. Psychologists noted that for individuals like Alex, rejection often serves as the catalyst for violence. Even during his arrest, Alex displayed a chilling detachment. His calm demeanor and denial of involvement suggested a complete lack of empathy or acknowledgement of his actions. As details of the case emerged, the media descended on Simshatsui, turning Aqua's murder into a national sensation. News outlets broadcast live updates, while social media platforms were flooded with speculation, outrage, and tributes. Aqua's students, friends, and followers shared stories of her kindness, ambition, and vibrant personality. Her social media accounts, once filled with yoga poses and motivational quotes, became digital memorials. Public sentiment quickly turned against Alex, with hashtags like Justice for Aqua and Arc End Control Abuse trending nationwide. Activists used the case to highlight the dangers of toxic relationships and the warning signs of coercive behavior. Advocacy groups demanded stronger protections for individuals in abusive relationships. The case reignited conversations about domestic violence, coercive control, and the systemic failures that allow such tragedies to occur. With Alex in custody and the evidence mounting, prosecutors prepared for what promised to be one of Hong Kong's most high-profile trials. The case against Alex was strong, but the defense hinted at a controversial strategy that would attempt to shift blame onto Aqua. The trial of Alex Lowe for the murder of Aqua Chow was nothing short of a media spectacle. It was a battle between justice and deception, where every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every argument was scrutinized by a nation hungry for answers. As the courtroom became a stage for high-stakes drama, the story of Aqua's life and death unfolded in excruciating detail, revealing the true nature of Alex's dark obsession. From the very beginning, the prosecution left no doubt about their narrative. Alex Lowe had deliberately planned and executed the murder of Aqua Chow. Their opening statement painted Alex as a manipulative predator who could not accept losing control over Aqua. The prosecution focused heavily on Alex's search history, which included phrases like how to tie someone up, best ways to silence someone, and quick stab kills. The zip ties found at the crime scene, purchased just days before the murder, were highlighted as evidence of a premeditated plan. Using CCTV footage and forensic evidence, the prosecution reconstructed the events leading to Aqua's death, showing how Alex manipulated her into meeting him and how the situation escalated into violence. Screenshots of threatening messages from Alex to Aqua, including, "If I can't have you, no one will," were presented to the court. These messages not only revealed his volatile mindset, but also demonstrated a clear intent to harm. The prosecution called Aqua's friends, family, and colleagues to testify, painting a vivid picture of a young woman full of promise whose life was cut short by violence. Their heartfelt words brought the courtroom to tears and underscored the devastating impact of her loss. Aqua's mother described her daughter's vibrant personality and dreams of making a difference in the world. "She was my sunshine," she said, her voice breaking. "She lit up every room she entered. Now, that light is gone." Aqua's closest friend recounted the fear Aqua had confided about Alex's controlling behavior. She wanted to leave him, but she also wanted to believe he could change. That's who she was, always giving people second chances. Aqua's yoga students shared stories of how she inspired them to pursue their goals and find inner peace. "She wasn't just a teacher," one student said. "She was a role model. She made everyone feel like they mattered." Alex's defense team took a controversial approach, attempting to shift blame onto Aqua herself. They argued that Aqua had agreed to meet Alex willingly, and that her death was the result of an argument that spiraled out of control, not premeditated murder. The defense painted the couple's relationship as mutually volatile, suggesting that both Aqua and Alex had contributed to the toxic dynamic. They argued that Alex's actions were impulsive rather than calculated. The defense sought to discredit the forensic evidence, suggesting that the zip ties and knife could have been purchased for unrelated purposes. They also questioned the reliability of Alex's search history, claiming it lacked direct links to Aqua's murder. Mental health defense. Psychologists called by the defense testified that Alex suffered from a personality disorder that impaired his ability to control his impulses. They argued that his actions were a result of emotional distress rather than premeditation. The most chilling moments of the trial came when forensic experts took the stand to describe Aqua's final moments. Their testimony provided a window into the brutality of the crime and left the courtroom in stunned silence. Forensic pathologists detailed how Aqua had suffered multiple stab wounds, with some inflicted while she was still conscious. The injuries showed signs of overkill, suggesting Alex's uncontrollable rage. Marks on Aqua's wrists and ankles revealed how tightly she had been bound, preventing her from defending herself. Blood patterns in the apartment indicated a prolonged struggle, underscoring the horror of her final moments. Experts determined that Aqua had likely been alive for several hours after being restrained, further supporting the prosecution's argument of a deliberate and prolonged attack. When Alex took the stand, his testimony was as unsettling as it was revealing. He maintained his innocence, claiming that Aqua's death was an accident and that he had no intention of harming her. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Alex told the court. "I loved her. I just wanted to talk." Alex repeatedly blamed Aqua for the argument that escalated into violence, portraying himself as a victim of her emotional outbursts. "She was angry that night," he claimed. "I didn't know how to calm her down." Despite his claims of love, Alex showed little emotion during his testimony. His cold demeanor and refusal to accept responsibility only strengthened the prosecution's case. Outside the courtroom, the trial dominated headlines and sparked widespread debate about relationships, coercive control, and the justice system. Advocacy groups condemned the defense's attempts to blame Aqua, arguing that such tactics perpetuated victim blaming. "Aqua isn't on trial," one protester said. "Her killer is." The case reignited discussions about the need for stronger protections against domestic violence and coercive control. Lawmakers began drafting proposals to address these issues, ensuring that Aqua's story would lead to meaningful change. International media outlets picked up the story, drawing parallels to other high-profile cases of relationship violence. Aqua's death became a rallying cry for survivors and advocates worldwide. As the trial drew to a close, the jury was left to decide: was Alex Lowe a cold-blooded killer who meticulously planned Aqua's murder, or a man who lost control in a moment of emotional turmoil? The weight of the evidence and the emotional impact of Aqua's story hung heavy in the courtroom. As the trial of Alex Lowe reached its climax, the tension inside the courtroom was palpable. After weeks of harrowing testimony, forensic evidence, and emotional accounts, the jury prepared to deliver their verdict. For Aqua Chow's family and friends, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to honor her life and seek justice for her untimely death. For Alex, it was a moment of truth that would define the rest of his life. On a rainy afternoon, the courtroom was packed with reporters, advocates, and members of the public. Aqua's family sat in silence, clutching one another's hands as the jury returned to deliver their decision. The jury found Alex Lowe guilty of first-degree murder, citing the overwhelming evidence of premeditation, including his search history, the bindings, and the deliberate nature of Aqua's injuries. The prosecution's portrayal of Alex as a manipulative and controlling individual had resonated strongly. The jury dismissed the defense's argument that Alex's actions were impulsive and driven by emotional distress. Instead, they agreed with the prosecution that his behavior showed clear intent to harm and control Aqua. Alex was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge described his actions as a calculated and heinous crime motivated by selfishness and a refusal to accept rejection. As the verdict was read, Aqua's mother broke down in tears, her cries echoing through the courtroom. "Justice has been served," she said afterward. "But it won't bring my daughter back." The verdict sparked an outpouring of emotion, both inside and outside the courtroom. For Aqua's loved ones, it was a bittersweet victory. A confirmation that Alex would pay for his crimes, but a reminder that nothing could undo the pain he had caused. Aqua's family expressed gratitude for the jury's decision, but emphasized the need to focus on Aqua's legacy rather than the crime itself. "She was more than what happened to her," her father said. "She was a light in our lives, and that's how we'll remember her." The public largely celebrated the verdict, seeing it as a victory for justice and a statement against coercive control and domestic violence. Social media platforms were flooded with messages of support for Aqua's family and calls for systemic change. While many were satisfied with the outcome, some criticized the delays and loopholes in the legal system that allowed Alex to evade detection for so long. Advocacy groups called for reforms to better address cases of relationship violence. Aqua's murder became a turning point in Hong Kong's fight against domestic violence and coercive control. Her story highlighted critical gaps in societal understanding and systemic protections, prompting widespread reflection and change. Lawmakers began drafting legislation to recognize coercive control as a form of domestic abuse, making it easier for victims to seek help and hold perpetrators accountable. Schools and community centers introduced programs to teach young people about healthy relationships, warning signs of manipulation, and the importance of setting boundaries. Funding for domestic violence, shelters, and counseling services increased, ensuring that individuals like Aqua had access to resources before situations escalated to violence. The media's extensive coverage of Aqua's case played a significant role in sparking public discourse and driving change. However, it also raised important questions about the ethics of reporting on such tragedies. News outlets and documentaries brought Aqua's story to a global audience, using her case to highlight the dangers of coercive relationships and the need for systemic reforms. Aqua's social media accounts were transformed into digital memorials, with followers sharing tributes and spreading awareness about her life and legacy. Some criticized the media for focusing too heavily on the grisly details of the crime rather than the systemic issues it revealed. "This isn't just a headline," one activist wrote. "It's a wake-up call." Despite the tragedy of her death, Aqua's life and story became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the fight for justice. Her family and friends worked tirelessly to ensure that her legacy would inspire change and protect others from similar fates. Her family established a foundation in her name to support victims of domestic violence and promote mental health awareness. The organization provided counseling, legal aid, and educational resources to empower survivors. Each year, on the anniversary of her death, advocates organized events to raise awareness about relationship violence and coercive control. These campaigns ensured that Aqua's story continued to inspire change. Reflecting Aqua's passion for teaching yoga, her family created a scholarship program to support young women pursuing careers in education and wellness. Aqua's story resonated deeply with the public, becoming a rallying cry for change and a reminder of the dangers of unchecked control. Her name became synonymous with strength, resilience, and the fight for justice. Communities organized vigils and marches to honor Aqua and demand better protections for vulnerable individuals. These events fostered a sense of unity and collective responsibility. Hashtags like Justice for Aqua and Mosaic Stop Coercive Control trended for weeks, sparking conversations about relationship violence and the importance of recognizing red flags. Artists, writers, and filmmakers used Aqua's story as inspiration for works that explored themes of love, loss, and the human spirit. These creations ensured that her legacy would endure. Aqua Chow's life was cut short by violence, but her story has left a lasting impact on Hong Kong and beyond. Her death exposed the dangers of coercive control, the importance of systemic change, and the power of collective action. "We couldn't save her," her mother said at a memorial, "but we can save others." That's what Aqua would have wanted, to make the world better, one step at a time. Aqua Chow's murder was not just a tragedy. It became a moment of reckoning for Hong Kong and beyond. Her story ignited widespread discussions about the dangers of coercive control, the shortcomings in societal protections, and the urgent need for reform. The ripples of her case extended far beyond the courtroom, inspiring movements for justice and change that continue to grow. Aqua's case highlighted significant gaps in legal frameworks addressing domestic violence and coercive control. Her death became a catalyst for lawmakers to propose and implement changes aimed at protecting vulnerable individuals. Advocacy groups pushed for laws that would recognize coercive control, manipulative, isolating behaviors as a form of domestic abuse. These laws would allow victims to seek protection before violence escalated to physical harm. Existing restraining orders were re-evaluated and strengthened. Authorities introduced measures to ensure these orders were enforced effectively, including tracking systems to monitor abusers and increase penalties for violations. Police departments created specialized units trained to handle cases of emotional abuse and coercive control, ensuring that victims' concerns were taken seriously and addressed proactively. Aqua's story underscored the importance of recognizing the warning signs of toxic relationships. Advocacy groups, educators, and community leaders launched awareness campaigns to empower individuals with knowledge and tools to protect themselves. Community centers hosted free workshops to teach participants about healthy relationships, red flags in abusive dynamics, and resources for seeking help. Educational institutions introduced curriculum focused on emotional intelligence, communication skills, and understanding boundaries, equipping young people with the skills to navigate relationships safely. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter became key tools for spreading awareness. Influencers and activists used these channels to share Aqua's story and provide practical advice for recognizing and escaping toxic relationships. The public outcry following Aqua's murder led to a surge in demand for resources to support victims of domestic violence and coercive control. Governments, NGOs, and community organizations responded by expanding their services. Domestic violence hotlines were staffed with more counselors trained to handle cases of emotional abuse. These helplines provided immediate support, guidance, and referrals to additional resources. New shelters were established to provide temporary housing for individuals escaping abusive relationships. These spaces offered not only physical safety, but also access to legal and psychological support. Victims received increased access to free or low-cost legal assistance, helping them navigate the often complex and intimidating process of securing restraining orders or pursuing legal action against abusers. Aqua's case sparked a broader cultural conversation about the ways society enables and perpetuates abusive behaviors. Advocacy groups used her story as a platform to challenge harmful stereotypes and promote empathy and accountability. Public campaigns focused on shifting the narrative around abuse survivors, emphasizing that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. This effort encouraged more individuals to come forward and share their experiences. Aqua's murder highlighted the dangers of traditional gender roles, particularly the expectation for women to remain submissive or prioritize others' needs over their own safety. Feminist organizations used the case to advocate for gender equality and empowerment. Experts emphasized the importance of understanding emotional abuse and manipulation, encouraging individuals to recognize and address toxic behaviors in their own lives and relationships. The media played a pivotal role in keeping Aqua's story alive and ensuring it became a catalyst for change. While some criticized the sensationalism surrounding the case, many recognized its impact in mobilizing public awareness and action. Filmmakers and journalists produced documentaries exploring Aqua's life, her relationship with Alex, and the systemic failures that contributed to her death. These projects served as both tributes and calls to action. Aqua's social media accounts were transformed into spaces of remembrance and advocacy, with followers sharing tributes, advice, and resources for those in similar situations. Writers and creators used Aqua's story as a lens to examine broader societal issues, ensuring that her legacy extended beyond her tragic death. While Aqua's case was rooted in Hong Kong, its impact reached far beyond the city's borders. Advocates and policymakers around the world drew parallels to similar cases and used her story to push for international reform. International organizations highlighted Aqua's story as part of a broader campaign against domestic violence and coercive control, emphasizing the need for global collaboration on these issues. Countries with similar gaps in their legal systems began examining their own policies, using Aqua's case as a cautionary tale and a blueprint for change. Aqua's name became synonymous with resilience and advocacy, inspiring movements for justice and equality worldwide. Despite the tragedy of her death, Aqua's story has become a source of hope and inspiration for countless individuals. Her legacy lives on through the initiatives, reforms, and cultural shifts she inspired. Established by her family, the foundation provides resources for survivors of domestic violence and supports programs promoting emotional health and relationship education. reflecting Aqua's passion for teaching and wellness. A scholarship program in her name funds education for aspiring teachers and yoga instructors. Each year, communities come together to honor Aqua's life and renew their commitment to protecting others from similar harm. Aqua Chow's life was tragically cut short, but her story has sparked a movement for justice, awareness, and change. Her legacy serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and collective action in the fight against relationship violence. She was a light in this world, her mother said at a memorial event. And even though that light was taken from us, it continues to shine through the lives she's touched and the change she's inspired. It began with a single phone call, a seemingly routine request for police assistance in one of Hong Kong's most affluent neighborhoods. But what officers found behind the closed doors of a luxury apartment would reveal a nightmare beyond imagination, shaking the city to its core and leaving an indelible scar on its collective conscience. It was Halloween night, October 31st, 2014, when the Hong Kong police received a call from a British expatriate living in the upscale neighborhood of Wan Chai. The caller, Rurik Jutting, calmly requested their presence at his apartment, citing an incident he needed to report. There was no urgency in his voice, no indication of the horror that awaited. When officers arrived at the towering residential complex, they were greeted by Jutting himself. Dressed casually and visibly composed, he led them up to his apartment on the 31st floor. The scene they walked into was one that would haunt them for years to come. The stench hit them first, a sickly metallic odor that signaled something was terribly wrong. As they entered the apartment, they were confronted with a sight that defied belief. In the bathroom, wrapped in plastic and stuffed into a suitcase, lay the decomposing body of Sumarti Ningsi, a 23-year-old migrant worker from Indonesia. She had been dead for several days, her body showing signs of torture and restraint. In the living room, on a blood-soaked mattress, lay the lifeless body of another woman, later identified as Seneng Mujasi, also an Indonesian migrant worker. Her throat had been slashed, and defensive wounds on her arms suggested she had fought desperately for her life. The apartment was in disarray. Discarded restraints, a hunting knife, and bottles of alcohol littered the space, hinting at the prolonged violence that had unfolded within its walls. As officers arrested Jutting and began questioning him, a disturbing portrait began to emerge. A 29-year-old British expatriate, Jutting had been living in Hong Kong for several years, working as a high-earning banker at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. On paper, he was the epitome of success, educated at Cambridge University, charismatic, and financially prosperous. But beneath the polished exterior lay a deeply disturbed individual whose unchecked privilege and inner demons had spiraled into unimaginable violence. The discovery sent shockwaves through Hong Kong and beyond. Within hours, news outlets across the globe picked up the story, dubbing it the Hong Kong banker horror. The juxtaposition of Jutting's professional prestige with the grotesque nature of his crimes captured the world's attention, sparking outrage and disbelief. Social media exploded with reactions, with many questioning how such atrocities could occur in a city known for its order and safety. Activists and advocates used the case to draw attention to the vulnerabilities of migrant workers, particularly those in the sex trade, who often operate on society's margins with little protection or support. As Jutting was taken into custody, his calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos he had created. He offered no resistance, instead providing chilling statements that hinted at his sadistic tendencies. "I did it," he reportedly told police. "I deserve whatever comes next." But what had driven this privileged young man to commit such heinous acts? And how had he been able to lure two women into his deadly trap? These were the questions that would dominate the investigation and trial, uncovering a story far darker than anyone could have anticipated. Before they became headlines and case files, they were daughters, sisters, and friends. Sumati Ningsi and Seneng Mujasi were more than just victims. They were two young women whose lives were filled with dreams, struggles, and sacrifices. To truly understand the horror of their deaths, we must first honor the lives they lived. Sumati Ningsi, the first victim found in Rurik Jutting's apartment, was only 23 years old at the time of her death. Born into a humble farming family in Indonesia's central Java region, Sumati grew up knowing the value of hard work. Her family depended on her, and she carried the weight of their expectations with quiet resilience. Like many young women from rural Indonesia, Sumati left her home in search of work abroad. She initially secured a domestic helper job in Hong Kong, sending most of her earnings back to support her parents and her young son, whom she adored. Life in Hong Kong was far from easy. As a domestic worker, Sumati endured long hours, low wages, and the constant fear of losing her job. When her visa expired, she faced a dilemma: return home with little savings or take risks to earn more. Desperate to secure a better future for her son, Sumati turned to sex work in Hong Kong. It was a dangerous choice, but one she felt was necessary. Her decision brought her into contact with Jutting, who preyed on her vulnerability under the guise of a lucrative job offer. Seneng Mujasi, also known as Jessie Lorena to her friends, was 29 years old when her life was brutally cut short. Born in Sulawesi, Indonesia, Seneng had a fiery spirit and a reputation for her infectious smile. Like Sumati, she had left her home country in search of better opportunities. Seneng was known for her independence and determination. She worked as a waitress and part-time domestic helper in Hong Kong, always striving to make a better life for herself. Friends recalled that Seneng often spoke of her dreams of opening a small restaurant back in Indonesia. She envisioned a life where she could leave behind the struggles of low-paying jobs and build something of her own. On the night she met Jutting, Seneng had no idea she was walking into a trap. Like Sumati, she was lured to his apartment under false pretenses, trusting a man who would ultimately betray her trust in the most horrifying way. Both women's stories reflect the harsh realities faced by migrant workers in Hong Kong, many of whom are forced into precarious positions due to financial hardships and limited legal protections. Hong Kong is home to over 390,000 migrant domestic workers, primarily from Indonesia and the Philippines. Many face exploitative conditions, including underpayment, abuse, and lack of job security. When their contracts end, they often find themselves in limbo, struggling to survive. For some, like Sumati and Seneng, turning to sex work becomes a last resort. The stigma and legal gray areas surrounding sex work leave women vulnerable to abuse, violence, and exploitation. Predators like Jutting thrive in such environments, preying on women who lack resources and support. Migrant workers often live on the fringes of society, isolated from their families and communities. Without a strong support system, they are easy targets for those who seek to exploit their desperation. While Sumati and Seneng's paths were different, their stories converged in the most tragic way imaginable. They were young women, full of hopes and dreams, doing their best to navigate a world that often seemed stacked against them. Both women showed incredible strength and resourcefulness, taking risks and making sacrifices for the people they loved. Their determination to create better lives for themselves and their families is a testament to their resilience. Their determination, however, also made them vulnerable. Their struggles to make ends meet and improve their circumstances placed them in precarious situations, ultimately leading them into the orbit of a man like Jotting. To reduce Sumati and Seneng to mere victims of a horrific crime would be to erase their humanity. They were more than their struggles. They were individuals with personalities, dreams, and the capacity to inspire those around them. Despite her hardships, Sumati always found ways to stay connected with her young son. Friends recalled how her face would light up whenever she spoke of him, her ultimate motivation for enduring the challenges of migrant life. Seneng's friends described her as a fighter with an unbreakable spirit. Even when life was tough, she never lost a sense of humor or her ability to lift the spirits of those around her. Their stories are not just personal tragedies. They are reflections of systemic failures. The lack of protections for migrant workers, the stigma surrounding sex work, and the indifference toward marginalized communities created the conditions that allowed Jutting to commit his crimes. "This isn't just about one man's horrific actions," said a human rights advocate following the trial. "It's about how society failed to protect two vulnerable women who deserved so much more." Behind the polished suits and six-figure salary of Rurik Jutting lurked a darkness that few could have imagined. As investigators delved into his life, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of privilege, addiction, and a gradual unraveling of his mental state. This descent would ultimately culminate in acts of unimaginable violence, leaving behind two innocent victims and a city reeling from the horrors he inflicted. Rurik Jutting was born into privilege in 1984 in Surrey, England. The son of a British telecom manager and a homemaker, he grew up in an affluent household and attended some of the UK's most prestigious schools. His academic prowess earned him a place at the University of Cambridge, where he studied history and law, setting the stage for a lucrative career in banking. After graduating, Jutting quickly climbed the corporate ladder, landing a high-paying job with Bank of America Merrill Lynch. His role took him to Hong Kong, a financial hub where his wealth and status afforded him a life of luxury. Colleagues described him as ambitious and confident, but there were whispers of arrogance and a tendency to look down on others. Beneath the surface, however, Jutting's seemingly perfect life was beginning to show cracks. He struggled with feelings of inadequacy, turning to excessive drinking and drug use to cope with the pressures of his high-stakes career. Jutting's hedonistic lifestyle began to spiral out of control during his time in Hong Kong. He frequently indulged in alcohol, cocaine, and other substances, creating a dangerous cocktail of addiction and mental instability. Investigators discovered that Jutting was consuming cocaine in alarming quantities, sometimes spending entire weekends binging in his luxury apartment. His addiction exacerbated his already fragile mental state, leading to erratic behavior. Jutting's drug use coincided with a growing obsession with violence and domination. His internet search history revealed visits to dark corners of the web, including forums and videos centered on sadism, torture, and abuse. As his addictions deepened, Jutting became increasingly isolated. He withdrew from colleagues and friends, spending more time alone in his apartment. Paranoia crept in, and he began recording video diaries that offered chilling insights into his disturbed psyche. During the investigation, police uncovered hours of video footage that Jutting had recorded in the days leading up to and following the murders. These diaries offered a haunting glimpse into the mind of a man descending into chaos. In the videos, Jutting referred to himself as an evil genius, alternately boasting about his intelligence and admitting to his depravity. He seemed aware of the monstrous nature of his actions, but reveled in the power he held over his victims. Jutting expressed conflicting emotions, oscillating between remorse and justification. "I know what I'm doing is wrong," he said in one video, "but I can't stop myself." He described his actions in graphic detail, showing no empathy for his victims. His words were laced with contempt, not just for them, but for society at large, which he viewed as complicit in creating a person like him. Jutting's descent into violence culminated on October 26, 2014, when he lured Sumati Ningsi to his apartment under the pretense of offering her work. What followed was a night of unimaginable horror. Jutting prepared meticulously for the encounter, purchasing restraints, knives, and even a sex toy that he later used to torment Sumati. He recorded much of the ordeal on his phone, capturing the cruelty he inflicted. For 3 hours, Jutting subjected Sumati to physical and psychological torture. Despite her desperate pleas for mercy, he showed no signs of relenting. Her suffering finally ended when he slit her throat and stuffed her body into a suitcase. Instead of disposing of the body, Jutting left the suitcase in his bathroom, living alongside it for days. This decision was emblematic of his growing detachment from reality and his perverse sense of control. Following Sumati's murder, Jutting's behavior became even more erratic. The presence of her body in his apartment did not deter him. Instead, it seemed to embolden him. Jutting continued his cocaine binges, using the drug to suppress whatever remnants of guilt or humanity he might have felt. He recorded more video diaries, reflecting on his actions with a chilling mix of pride and detachment. Just days after killing Sumati, Jutting began seeking out another victim. His search led him to Seneng Mujasi, whom he met in a bar, and lured back to his apartment under the guise of a high-paying job offer. Despite his escalating violence, Jutting maintained a veneer of normalcy in public. Colleagues and acquaintances noted that while he seemed stressed and withdrawn, no one could have guessed the depths of his depravity. In hindsight, there were warning signs. Jutting's erratic behavior and excessive spending raised eyebrows among his peers. but his status and charm allowed him to deflect suspicion. Jutting's wealth and position afforded him a degree of invisibility. He operated in spaces where his actions were unlikely to face scrutiny, particularly when targeting marginalized women with limited resources. Jutting's descent into darkness was not the result of a single moment, but a culmination of privilege, addiction, and unchecked impulses. By the time he met Seneng, his descent was complete. He was no longer hiding his sadistic tendencies. He was reveling in them. Stay tuned as we recount the horrifying events of the second murder and the nightmarish final hours in Rurik Jotting's apartment. How did his twisted fantasies escalate so quickly? And how did the discovery of his crimes ultimately bring his reign of terror to an end? Just 5 days after brutally murdering Sumarti Ningsi, Rurik Jotting's violent urges reached a terrifying crescendo. On the night of October 31st, 2014, his descent into depravity claimed another innocent life. The calculated way he lured his second victim, Seneng Mujasi, and the horrific events that unfolded in his Wanchai apartment would finally lead to his capture. But not before another life was lost. On Halloween night, Jutting set his sights on finding another victim. Fueled by drugs, alcohol, and his growing sense of invincibility, he ventured into Wanchai's bustling nightlife district, where he often frequented bars and clubs that catered to expatriates. At one of his regular haunts, Jutting met 29-year-old Seneng Mujasi, a part-time waitress and domestic worker who occasionally supplemented her income through sex work. He offered her an enticing amount of money to accompany him back to his apartment, a common arrangement in her line of work. For Seneng, the offer was an opportunity to earn what could have been months' worth of wages in a single night. She accepted, unaware of the danger she was walking into. CCTV footage later revealed the two entering Jotting's luxury, high-rise apartment building. Seneng appeared calm, perhaps even smiling, as she walked beside the man who would soon betray her trust in the most horrific way imaginable. Once inside the apartment, Jotting's demeanor shifted. The polished, seemingly harmless man Seneng had met at the bar transformed into a sadistic predator. What unfolded next was a nightmarish series of events that showcased Jotting's complete detachment from reality and his twisted need for control. Jotting wasted no time overpowering Seneng. He restrained her using the same zip ties he had purchased before Sumarti's murder, and began subjecting her to verbal and physical abuse. His actions were deliberate and methodical, as if he had planned every move in advance. Unlike Sumarti, Seneng fought back with every ounce of strength she had. Her screams and pleas for mercy echoed through the apartment, but Jutting showed no signs of remorse or hesitation. Instead, he seemed to feed off her fear, further cementing his sense of dominance. After hours of torment, Jutting ended Seneng's life by slashing her throat. Forensic evidence later revealed that she had sustained multiple defensive wounds, a testament to her fierce will to survive even in the face of insurmountable odds. The murder of Seneng marked a turning point in Jotting's unraveling. Unlike Sumarti's death, which he managed to conceal for days, the circumstances surrounding Seneng's murder quickly drew attention. Neighbors in the building reported hearing loud screams and banging noises coming from Jutting's apartment. One resident later described the sounds as blood-curdling prompting multiple calls to the police. For reasons that remain unclear, Jutting himself called the police shortly after Seneng's murder. Some speculate that his growing paranoia or the realization that he could no longer cover up his crimes compelled him to confess. Whatever the reason, his call ultimately led to his arrest. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Seneng's body lay on the blood-soaked mattress in the living room, surrounded by the tools of Jutting's depravity. Nearby, Sumarti's decomposing body remained stuffed in the suitcase where Jutting had left her 5 days earlier. As police entered the apartment, Jutting displayed an unsettling calm. He offered no resistance, instead greeting officers with a chilling confession. "It's all here," he reportedly said, gesturing toward the grisly evidence that filled the room. Jutting was immediately taken into custody. His behavior during the arrest was described as unnervingly composed, with officers noting his lack of emotion or remorse. Among the items recovered from the apartment were the knives used in the murders, sex toys, restraints, and Jutting's phone, which contained video recordings of both murders. These recordings would later serve as damning evidence during his trial. News of the murders spread quickly, sending shockwaves through Hong Kong and the international community. The sheer brutality of the crimes, coupled with Jutting's privileged background, ignited widespread outrage and disbelief. Residents of Hong Kong were horrified that such heinous acts could occur in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Activists used the case to highlight the vulnerabilities faced by migrant workers, particularly those involved in sex work. The case garnered global media attention, with headlines focusing on the contrast between Jutting's status as a wealthy banker and the gruesome nature of his crimes. The press dubbed him the Hong Kong banker killer, cementing his infamy. Advocacy groups demanded greater protections for vulnerable women, urging the government to address the systemic issues that left individuals like Sumarti and Seneng exposed to such dangers. The discovery of Jutting's crimes marked a dark chapter in Hong Kong's history, forcing the city to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, exploitation, and the safety of its most marginalized residents. As Jutting awaited trial, the world braced itself for the revelations that would emerge about the man behind the horror. As Rurik Jutting faced trial for his heinous crimes, the courtroom became a stage for shocking revelations, emotional testimonies, and fierce legal battles. The trial captivated Hong Kong and the world, not only for the graphic details of the case, but also for the broader societal questions it raised about privilege, justice, and the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities. Jutting was charged with 2 counts of murder for the brutal killings of Sumarti Ningsi and Seneng Mujiasi. His trial began in October 2016, nearly 2 years after the murders, and lasted for 3 weeks. From the outset, both the prosecution and defense laid out starkly opposing narratives. Prosecutors described Jutting as a cold, calculating killer who meticulously planned and executed his crimes. They presented extensive evidence, including video recordings Jutting made during the murders, his search history, and forensic analysis of the crime scenes. The prosecution argued that Jutting's actions were not impulsive, but deliberate and sadistic. This was the work of a man who reveled in his own depravity, the lead prosecutor declared. Jating's defense team did not dispute that he had killed Sumarti and Seneng, but argued that he was not criminally responsible due to diminished mental capacity. They claimed that his actions were the result of severe mental illness, including personality disorders exacerbated by chronic substance abuse. The centerpiece of the trial was the video evidence recovered from Jating's phone. Those recordings, which documented both the murders and Jating's reflections afterward, were described as some of the most harrowing evidence ever presented in a Hong Kong courtroom. In the videos, Jating described in detail how he tortured and killed his victims. He spoke with chilling detachment, referring to himself as a psychopath and an evil genius. Jating alternated between moments of self-loathing and attempts to rationalize his actions. At one point, he claimed that the murders were an experiment to explore his darker impulses. The videos were so disturbing that some jurors reportedly struggled to maintain composure. Members of the victims' families, who were present in court, wept openly as the footage was played. The trial was not only about Jating's actions. It was also about the lives he had taken. The families of Sumarti and Seneng provided heartbreaking testimonies, humanizing the women who had been reduced to statistics in a gruesome crime. Sumarti's father spoke via video link from Indonesia, describing his daughter as a loving mother and a devoted daughter. "She left to give her son a better future," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Now he will grow up without her." Friends of Seneng remembered her as a spirited, hardworking woman with dreams of returning to Indonesia to start her own business. "She deserved so much more than this," one friend said. When the jury returned with a unanimous verdict of guilty on both counts of murder, the presiding judge, Mr. Justice Michael Stewart Moore, delivered a powerful statement during sentencing. Jating was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge described his actions as evil and inhumane, emphasizing that the brutality of the crimes left no room for leniency. In his remarks, the judge criticized Jating's exploitation of his wealth and privilege, stating, "You used your position to prey on the vulnerable, treating them as disposable objects for your own gratification." The judge's statement also highlighted the systemic failures that allowed Jating to target marginalized women. This case should serve as a wake-up call to address the vulnerabilities faced by migrant workers and those living on the fringes of society. The trial and its verdict sparked a wave of public responses, both in Hong Kong and internationally. While many expressed relief that Jating was held accountable, the case also ignited broader discussions about systemic injustice and societal complacency. Advocacy groups criticized how Jating's wealth and status had shielded him from scrutiny for so long. "This wasn't just about one man's crimes," one activist said. "It's about a system that allowed him to act with impunity." The case brought attention to the challenges faced by migrant workers in Hong Kong, particularly those in domestic service or sex work. Vigils were held to honor Sumarti and Seneng, with calls for greater protections for vulnerable women. International media coverage of the trial turned the case into a rallying point for discussions about gender-based violence, the exploitation of migrant labor, and the intersections of privilege and power. While Jating's life sentence brought a sense of closure to the case, many felt that true justice could only be achieved through systemic change. Advocacy groups and community leaders vowed to use the tragedy as a catalyst for reform. Lawmakers began drafting proposals to strengthen protections for migrant workers and improve safety regulations for those involved in sex work. Education and awareness. Educational campaigns were launched to address the stigmas surrounding sex work and to promote understanding of the vulnerabilities faced by marginalized communities. The trial of Rurik Jutting was more than a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning for Hong Kong, forcing the city to confront the dark intersections of privilege, violence, and systemic inequality. For Sumarti and Seneng, it was a belated recognition of their humanity, ensuring that their lives, and not just their deaths, would be remembered. The murders of Sumarti Ningsi and Seneng Mujasi were not just isolated tragedies. They were a reflection of systemic failures that allowed vulnerable individuals to fall through the cracks. The aftermath of the case sparked critical conversations and inspired reforms aimed at protecting those who are most at risk. While the horrors of Rurik Jutting's actions cannot be undone, the lessons drawn from this case have left an indelible mark on Hong Kong and the global fight against exploitation and violence. The case exposed glaring gaps in how society protects marginalized communities, particularly migrant workers and sex workers. Advocacy groups, policy makers, and human rights organizations used the public outcry as a catalyst for reform. Hong Kong's reliance on migrant domestic workers was thrown into stark focus. The government implemented new policies to better regulate the employment of migrant workers, including ensuring fair wages and working conditions, providing stronger legal protections against exploitation and abuse, introducing counseling and support services for those experiencing hardship. The case highlighted the dangers faced by sex workers, who often operate without legal protections. Advocacy groups pushed for decriminalization of sex work to reduce stigma and improve access to legal recourse, dedicated shelters and hotlines for sex workers in crisis, community outreach programs to provide education on personal safety and available resources. To better address violence against vulnerable groups, Hong Kong's police force introduced specialized training programs on handling cases involving migrant workers and sex workers. These programs emphasized empathy, cultural sensitivity, and proactive measures to prevent violence. Jutting's case resonated far beyond Hong Kong, serving as a grim reminder of the pervasive issues of gender-based violence, exploitation, and the abuse of power. The trial highlighted how wealth and privilege can be weaponized to exploit the vulnerable. International media coverage drew attention to the unchecked entitlement of individuals like Jutting, prompting calls for accountability in global corporate cultures. Human rights organizations used the case to campaign for stronger measures against violence targeting women, particularly those in precarious situations. The hashtag Justice for Sumarti and Seneng trended globally, amplifying the stories of the victims. The exploitation of migrant workers in countries around the world became a focal point for activists. Governments in Southeast Asia and the Middle East faced renewed scrutiny over their treatment of domestic workers, leading to policy changes in some regions. For the families of Sumarti and Seneng, the legal resolution of the case was only part of the journey. they sought to ensure that the world remembered their loved ones not as victims, but as individuals with hopes, dreams, and vibrant lives. Community organizations in Indonesia established memorials in honor of Sumati and Seneng, celebrating their resilience and courage. These memorials served as spaces for reflection and advocacy, reminding visitors of the need to protect the vulnerable. Scholarships were created in the names of Sumati and Seneng to support young women in their home communities. These funds aim to provide opportunities that would prevent others from facing the same dangers they had endured. The families of the victims became outspoken advocates for migrant worker rights. "My daughter's life was taken, but her story will save others," Sumati's father said during a memorial service. While Jutting's conviction brought closure to the legal case, the broader societal reckoning highlighted the need for collective accountability. The case underscored the importance of acknowledging and addressing the structural inequalities that leave individuals vulnerable to exploitation. Governments, corporations, and communities were urged to take a more active role in protecting at-risk populations. Activists worked to destigmatize sex work and the struggles of migrant workers, arguing that society's biases contribute to their marginalization and make them easier targets for predators. Educational campaigns promoted empathy and understanding, encouraging individuals to see beyond stereotypes and recognize the humanity of those living on the margins. While the story of Rurik Jutting is one of unimaginable cruelty, the legacies of Sumati Ningsi and Seneng Mujasi are rooted in resilience and hope. Their deaths sparked a movement that continues to inspire change, ensuring that their lives were not lost in vain. Advocacy groups have pledged to keep fighting for the rights and safety of migrant workers and sex workers, using Sumati and Seneng's stories as rallying cries. Documentaries, books, and artistic projects have been created to tell the story of the case, ensuring that the lessons learned are passed on to future generations. In the words of a human rights advocate, "We cannot undo what happened, but we can honor their memory by building a world where no one else has to suffer as they did." The case of Rurik Jutting is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of privilege and power. But it is also a story of resilience, of two women who fought against unimaginable odds and whose stories have inspired a global movement for justice and change. "This isn't just about one man's crimes," said a speaker at a memorial event. "It's about the systems that failed these women and the responsibility we all share to make sure it never happens again." Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of Hong Kong's darkest chapters. Let this story remind us of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Together, we can honor the lives of Sumati and Seneng by ensuring their legacy brings light to those still living in the shadows.